Okay, let's unpack this. We are diving into it's arguably the most essential body of knowledge for effective living.
It really is.
We're talking about decoding the predictable, the systematic irrationality that's just, baked into the human brain.
Right.
We've compiled a whole stack of research here, from the foundations of behavioral economics to this massive catalog of cognitive errors.
And it all proves the same thing.
Yeah, that our brains are not reliable calculators, not at all. There are these sophisticated pattern-seeking machines that are they're prone to specific repetitive failure modes.
That's the key distinction, isn't it? Our mission today isn't just to, list off these biases.
No.
It's to internalize the mechanisms behind them. This
Yep.
isn't about the occasional random lapse in judgment. This is about identifying the systematic deviation from logic. These predictable pitfalls that affect absolutely everyone, from a Wall Street trader to, you deciding what to buy at the grocery store.
I really appreciate that focus. This deep dive, it functions effectively as an insurance policy.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about feeling superior or smarter than other people. It's about acknowledging our own hardwired limitations so we can build defenses against the common and, let's be honest, often very expensive mistakes.
Financially or psychologically, yeah.
Mistakes we are guaranteed to make if we trust our gut a little too often.
Exactly. The sources are so clear on this. These errors are deeply ingrained because, they evolved to keep us alive in a very different world.
A much simpler world.
A much simpler, more dangerous world.
Right.
But in the modern world of, complex finance, long-term planning, and just constant information overload, that native wiring becomes a liability.
So what do we do?
We need external formalized structures, things like checklists or institutional protocols, to basically override that faulty intuition.
Okay, so to begin, let's set the stage with the field that really formalized this whole investigation. What exactly is behavioral economics, and how did it fundamentally change how we view human decision-making?
Behavioral economics was, and this is not an exaggeration, it was a revolution. It's the integration of psychology and economics.
Which seems so obvious now, but it wasn't for a long time.
Not at all. For decades, classical economics operated under this assumption of homo economicus, the purely rational actor who always seeks to maximize their utility based on perfect information.
A total myth.
A complete myth.
Yeah.
Behavioral economics came in and showed with data that this person doesn't exist. It studies how we actually make decisions, under the powerful influence of our cognitive biases, our emotional states, and social norms.
It proved that human irrationality isn't just noise.
It's data. It's predictable data.
And the mechanism at the heart of this data is our intuitive, fast-thinking system, right? The research leans so heavily on the concept of the two systems of thinking.
Correct. When we talk about exploiting or capitalizing on what are called judgmental heuristics, we are really talking about system one decision-making.
The fast one.
The fast, intuitive, automatic process. It handles things like recognizing a friend's face or knowing the answer to 2 + 2. It's incredibly efficient, and we rely on it 90% of the time.
But that's where the problems start.
That's precisely where all these systematic errors are born. Our whole aim, really, is to find ways to force a transfer into System 2, the slow, rational, effortful process, when the stakes are high enough to warrant it.
That fast-slow distinction is so critical. Now, the source material made this fascinating observation about the universality of these biases versus their practical impact. Specifically, it noted that non-standard economic behavior is often more pronounced in the global South. Why would this universal cognitive wiring lead to different visible outcomes based on geography?
Well, that's where you get into behavioral development economics, which is all about context. The biases themselves are universal, that's true.
Right.
Everyone has a tendency towards a procrastination or present bias. However, in environments that are characterized by higher poverty rates, extreme financial instability, informal labor markets, weaker institutions, those biases get amplified.
Can you give us an example of that amplification? How does that work in the real world?
Sure. Let's take the universal bias of discounting the future.
Okay.
If you are wealthy, procrastinating on saving for retirement might cost you some opportunity interest, but you're not going to starve.
Right.
If you're living day to day, the immediate salient cost of a preventative measure, say buying a water filter or getting a vaccination, it just outweighs the perceived future benefit. The sheer daily pressure of scarcity drains your cognitive bandwidth, which makes it much harder to engage that slow System 2 thinking.
So you're just stuck in System 1 survival mode.
Exactly. And that leaves people much more vulnerable to System 1 errors, like immediate gratification. So the policies you need have to be far more carefully tailored than in stable economies.
So if the choice architecture is already so precarious, simple nudges might not be enough. And that brings us perfectly to nudge theory.
Right.
And Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein really brought this into the public mind. What is the precise definition of a nudge, and what's the political philosophy that's underpinning it?
A nudge, defined very strictly, is any aspect of the choice architecture that alters people's behavior in a predictable way
Okay.
without forbidding any options or significantly changing their economic incentives. And this is key. The intervention has to be easy and cheap to avoid.
And the philosophy behind it is what they called libertarian paternalism.
Exactly.
That sounds like a complete contradiction in terms. How does that possibly work?
It's actually really clever. It's
Yeah.
paternalism. Because the choice architect, the government, the company, the designer, is trying to steer you toward a better outcome, one they've determined is beneficial, like better health or more savings.
But it's libertarian because
Because they preserve your freedom of choice. You can always opt out. The choice architect simply structures the environment to make the desired choice the easiest one, the path of least resistance.
the classic illustration is the cafeteria, right? Putting the fruit at eye level is a nudge.
That's a nudge. Banning the desserts is not.
Right.
Or think about defaults. One of the most powerful nudges is just setting a default option. In many countries, people have to actively opt out of organ donation. The default is opt-in.
And that dramatically increases donation rates.
Dramatically, without removing anyone's freedom. It's the same with retirement savings. Automatically enrolling employees and making them opt out is a monumental nudge against inertia and procrastination. It uses System 1's laziness to achieve a System 2 goal.
And the political relevance of this was just huge. I mean, Sunstein's appointment to the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs showed this wasn't just some academic theory.
No, it was a policy tool being implemented by high-level governments in both the U.S. and the U.K.
It seems like a profound shift.
It was. It was a shift away from that heavy-handed regulation toward more subtle, evidence-based behavioral influence. It treated the citizen not as a perfectly rational being who just needs more information, but as a cognitively limited human who needs their environment optimized for positive outcomes.
Okay, let's zoom in now on 3 specific cognitive shortcuts. These heuristics that define our immediate decision-making, starting with one called satisficing.
Satisficing is a concept from Herbert Simon. It's a search heuristic, really, a strategy for coping with an overwhelming information environment.
Which is everywhere now.
Exactly. The concept is simple. You stop searching for options once a minimum requirement, what he called an aspiration level, has been met. You don't aim for the absolute, perfect, optimal choice. You aim for good enough.
So if I'm looking for a new apartment and the third one I see meets all my mandatory criteria, it's in budget, safe neighborhood, 2 bedrooms, I just stop looking.
You stop looking.
Even if the absolute best apartment is, the 10th one on the list that I never see.
Precisely. In that moment, you are a satisficer. And honestly, in many areas of life, choosing breakfast cereal, picking a movie, even hiring for some jobs, satisficing is incredibly efficient.
Because the effort to find the absolute best just isn't worth it.
The marginal utility you'd gain from finding the absolute best option often doesn't justify the immense time and energy required to search exhaustively through hundreds of alternatives.
But there's a danger here. You mentioned earlier the risk of paralysis. This is for the maximizers, the people who try to satisfy, but they set the bar way too high.
Absolutely. If your aspiration level is impossibly high, you demand an apartment that is both enormous and in the cheapest part of the city and has a concierge, you'll find nothing.
Right.
The search just continues indefinitely, leads to decision paralysis, and frankly, a lot of frustration. Satisficing is the necessary compromise that lets us function, trading perfect optimization for sanity and speed.
Okay, next up, mental accounting. This one reveals how completely illogically we treat money just because we put it in different imaginary boxes.
Mental accounting is this propensity we have to allocate money into different mental buckets based on its source or its intended use. So we might have a rent account, a fun money account, and a rainy day account in our heads.
Even though a dollar is a dollar.
Rationally, money is fungible, a dollar's a dollar. But psychologically, these buckets are very real, and they influence our spending habits dramatically.
And this connects directly to the house money effect, doesn't it? The idea that we treat money we find or win with so much less respect than money we earn.
It's the ultimate expression of mental accounting. Imagine you get a tax refund or you win $500 at a casino.
Okay.
That money often gets placed in the windfall bucket, which has much, much looser spending rules than the salary bucket. People are far more likely to take bigger risks or make frivolous purchases with this house money.
Because it feels like it's not real money.
It feels expendable. This psychological separation is why you see so many studies that find lottery winners, despite inheriting these vast sums, often end up worse off than they started. They just treat the winnings as separate from their core financial survival.
It's so hard to be rational when one bucket in your head is labeled hard-earned necessities, and the other one is free gift from the universe.
It requires a real System 2 intervention to force yourself to transfer that $500 windfall into the retirement savings bucket and treat it exactly the same as the $500 you earn through a week of hard labor.
All right, finally in this section, let's hit a pure probability error that trips up almost everyone. The gambler's fallacy.
The gambler's fallacy comes from our deep, deep discomfort with randomness. Specifically, it's our misapplication of the law of large numbers to really small, visible sequences.
So it's the belief that if something has happened a lot in the past, it's less likely to happen in the future.
Yes, even if the probability remains absolutely constant because the events are independent.
The coin flip example is probably the easiest way to grasp this.
It is. If a coin flips heads 5 times in a row, the gambler feels deep in their gut that the 6th flip must be tails.
It feels like it's due.
They believe in this balancing force in the universe, an inevitable regression back to the 50-50 mean, and they think that correction is due right now. But the coin has no memory. Each flip is totally independent of the last.
And the sources gave that really relatable anecdote of the friend who tracks the Mega Millions numbers.
Oh, yeah.
The ones that have appeared the least frequently, thinking they're more likely to come up.
That person is a classic victim of the fallacy. They are projecting a pattern onto truly random events. If a lottery ball hasn't been drawn in 5 years, it doesn't mean it's due.
It means nothing.
The mechanical probability of drawing that specific number is identical to every other number. Just recognizing the difference between true independent randomness like coin flips, roulette, lotteries, and dependent events like drawing cards from a deck without replacement, that's fundamental to financial clarity.
All right, section 2 moves from how we handle choice to how we handle raw sensory data and uncertainty. We're talking about our innate, just stubborn tendency to see order where only chaos exists.
And this tendency is really driven by necessity. I mean, evolutionarily, the world is noisy and dangerous.
Yeah.
Finding patterns was crucial for survival.
If that rustle in the grass usually means a lion.
You jump every single time. But in the modern world, this instinct generates what's known as the clustering illusion. We see clusters or streaks in truly random sequences, and we just assume they're significant.
The WWII London example from the sources is incredibly powerful on this because it shows this instinct operating under the most intense stress imaginable.
It's just heartbreakingly clear. During the German V-1 rocket attacks, the residents of London were, understandably desperate for some kind of predictability.
Of course.
They plotted the impact sites on maps, looking for zones of safety or high-risk areas. They created these sophisticated theories. Maybe the Germans were deliberately targeting utilities, or maybe they were targeting poor neighborhoods.
But it was all random.
Statistical analysis later showed the distribution was entirely random. It was due to the rocket's very inaccurate navigation. The people invented the pattern to cope with the terror of pure randomness.
That desire to impose human significance on noise also shows up visually in pareidolia.
Absolutely. The brain is so specialized in face recognition that it will impose a face onto any vague visual data clouds, electrical outlets.
Or toast.
Or, as the source mentions, food. The woman optioning a piece of toast that she said had the likeness of the Virgin Mary for $28,000.
Incredible.
Or seeing Jesus in a tortilla. These are high-stakes examples of just noise being misinterpreted as profound meaning. The failure is that our face recognition software is just working too well. It's interpreting Scree on Mars as a gigantic sculpture, only for later, clearer images to reveal it's just a random hill.
So the clustering illusion is a problem, but it's often a passive one. The next one, confirmation bias. This is an active process of self-deception. The sources rightly called it the mother of all misconceptions. Why is this one so dangerous?
Because it protects the integrity of our existing worldview at all costs, even if that worldview is completely wrong.
It's an ego defense.
It is. Confirmation bias is the powerful tendency to interpret new evidence as confirmation of our existing theories and beliefs, while systematically ignoring or downplaying any evidence that disconfirms it.
The Warren Buffett quote is just so perfect here. What the human being is best at doing is interpreting all new information so that their prior conclusions remain intact.
We are expert self-defenders. And this isn't necessarily malicious, it's just cognitive efficiency. It takes huge mental effort, system to effort, to admit you were wrong. It's so much easier, a system one shortcut, to just subtly refilter the data.
And the key to breaking this pattern, as the famous 246 experiment shows, is to actively go looking for things that challenge your belief.
Right, so the researcher gives students the sequence 246 and asks them to guess the rule by testing more sequences.
Okay.
The overwhelming majority will test sequences like 8, 10, 12, confirming their initial hypothesis, which is usually the rule is adding 2.
And they feel successful.
They do, because their examples confirm their idea. But the truly insightful student, the one who found the real rule, which was simply the next number must be higher than the previous one, was the one who tested wildly different numbers, things like -2 or 7. They consciously tried to dismantle their own hypothesis.
Which is so hard to do.
It's profoundly difficult to try and prove yourself wrong.
And what we've built now with the internet and social media is essentially a confirmation bias machine gun.
Oh, absolutely. The algorithms are designed to maximize engagement, and they do that by feeding us content that reinforces what we already believe. Our chosen news sources, our political echo chambers, they all shield us from divergent opinions and disconfirming facts.
We end up in these cognitive bubbles.
Increasingly, yes. And it makes it easier than ever to think we're right simply because everyone around us and every feed we see agrees with us.
There's a dangerous relative of confirmation bias called the "it'll get worse before it gets better" fallacy. This is basically a prediction that's immune to being disproven.
It's a classic rhetorical trick. You see it a lot with poor diagnosticians or failing managers. It's designed to provide cover no matter what the outcome is.
So if things get worse.
If the company restructures and the stock keeps dropping for 3 months, the CEO says, "See, we predicted this delicate period of cleansing."
And if it gets better.
If the stock suddenly rallies, they claim credit for the success of the cleansing period. It's a total smokescreen. It protects the predictor's ego by framing any negative event as a necessary step toward the eventual positive conclusion. You just can't lose with that prediction.
Okay, so our brain also loves narratives more than it loves raw data, which leads us to story bias. We prefer a compelling, emotionally resonant story, even if it's factually irrelevant.
Stories are just so deeply ingrained in us because they're powerful retention tools. We remember the narrative arc, the characters, the emotional connection much more easily than we remember a set of abstract statistics.
This is why advertisers use them.
It's all they do. They build emotional stories around products rather than just listing facts about horsepower or gigabytes. Think of that Google Parisian Love commercial. It tells this universal emotional story of a relationship using nothing but simple search terms.
But the false sense of understanding that a good story gives you can lead you to take bigger risks, right? Because you feel like you understand a complex situation better than you actually do.
And that leads directly to the actionable advice from the sources. When you're faced with a persuasive story, engage system 2. Ask the 3 critical questions. Who is the sender? What is their ultimate intention? And most importantly, what critical information did they deliberately hide under the rug?
The omission is the key.
The omission is almost always the key to clarity.
This story bias also leads us straight into another error, the conjunction fallacy, where our attraction to plausible stories just overrides mathematical probability.
This is a famous cognitive test failure. We are just terrible at judging the probability of specific events. Because we love these harmonious or plausible stories, we often mistakenly believe that 2 specific events happening together, a conjunction, are more likely than one single, broader event happening on its own.
The example here is Chris, the bank worker.
Yes, so if I tell you that Chris is a bank worker and then I ask you which is more likely, A, Chris is a bank worker, or B, Chris is a bank worker who is also an aid worker.
Most people pick B.
Most people, drawn to the plausibility and the detail of that story, that virtuous image of the aid worker, will select B. But mathematically, the probability of A and B happening together can never be greater than the probability of A alone.
Right. If B is true, A has to be true, but not the other way around.
Exactly. Our love of a good narrative just makes us logically inept.
Finally, in our perception errors, we have the salience effect, where the loudest or the most outstanding features just hog all the attention.
This is so critical for filtering news and evaluating risk. The salience effect ensures that things that stand out visually, emotionally, dramatically get way more attention than they deserve.
So a journalist at a traffic accident?
If they're covering a crash and they see one single outstanding detail, let's say a small amount of marijuana in the wreckage, they might rush to the conclusion, marijuana kills yet another motorist.
Even if it had nothing to do with the crash.
Exactly. Even if, statistically, there is zero correlation between that factor and the cost of the crash. The vivid detail just overrides the systemic statistical reality. We have to train ourselves to look beyond the shiny, outstanding features and consider the dull, quiet facts that might actually explain the situation.
All right, moving into section 3, we're exploring how our sense of value is just fundamentally corrupted by context. We simply do not deal well with absolute judgments. Everything is comparative.
And the mechanism here starts with the contrast effect. We judge things as expensive or large or beautiful or small only in relation to a reference point, something ugly, cheap, or massive that's right in front of us. Without that comparison, we really struggle to assign an objective value.
And industry professionals, they understand this profoundly. It's why sellers will use the cheapest, worst option as the reference point.
Exactly. You see this most clearly in the car industry or high-end retail. If you're buying a $60,000 vehicle and the salesperson offers luxury leather seats for $3,000,
It seems like nothing.
it seems like a pittance. You contrast it with the $60,000 you've already spent, and the upgrade feels proportional and small. If you were asked to buy those same leather seats for $3,000 as a standalone item, you'd likely say, no way.
By setting that high initial contrast, the add-ons seem incredibly cheap.
It's a classic trick.
And a related, really insidious effect is anchoring, where the first number mentioned, even if it's totally irrelevant, sets the whole stage for how we value something.
Anchoring is pervasive, and it's deeply rooted in System 1 thinking. We just cling to the first piece of information, the anchor, when we're estimating numbers or negotiating, regardless of its relevance.
The sources highlight this astonishing experiment about this.
The one with the wine bottle. A professor asked students to write down the last 2 digits of their social security numbers, a purely arbitrary anchor, and then bid on a rare bottle of wine.
And what happened?
It was incredible. Students whose social security endings were higher, say 98, bid nearly twice as much for the wine as students whose numbers were lower, say 12.
That's insane! Their social security number.
Those completely random digits served as an unconscious, misleading anchor that warped their entire sense of value for the wine. The implication is huge. The first number thrown out in any negotiation, a salary request, a price quote, it sets a persistent, irrational baseline.
Okay, let's shift to the psychology of ownership, starting with the really devastating impact of loss aversion. We hate losing way more than we enjoy gaining.
Loss aversion dictates that the fear of losing something motivates people about twice as much as the prospect of gaining something of equal objective value. Losing $100 hurts far, far more than finding $100 feels good.
And this tendency leads to some profoundly non-optimal decisions, especially when you're investing.
It leads to overconservatism and paralysis. Investors will often cling to a declining stock because they fear realizing or confirming the loss by selling it.
Even if the stock is never going to recover.
Even then, they postpone the pain. But it's also a powerful tool in sales. If you're trying to sell home insulation, telling customers they are losing $500 a year right now through poor energy efficiency is far more motivating than telling them they could save $500 a year.
Framing it as a loss is twice as potent.
Exactly.
And this fear of realizing a loss, it feeds right into the endowment effect, the irrational assignment of inflated value to our own possessions.
The endowment effect is the high price of ownership. The moment we own something, its perceived value just jumps. Because selling it now would trigger loss aversion. We would demand a far higher price to sell a ticket or a used car or a collectible than we would ever be willing to pay to acquire it in the first place. This bias just makes negotiations so fraught because both sides are over-objectively valuing what they already possess.
Okay, next, let's talk about what happens when we have too much of a good thing. The paradox of choice. Selection feels like progress, but too much choice can actively ruin your quality of life.
The paradox emerges when the limit of optimal choice is exceeded, and we see 2 primary negative effects. The first is what they call inner paralysis,
The jam study.
the famous jam study. Researchers set up a display with 24 flavors of exotic jelly and another one with only 6 flavors. The table with only 6 flavors generated dramatically more sales. often 10 times more.
Because people just got overwhelmed.
Customers faced with 24 options felt so overwhelmed they couldn't decide, and so they just bought nothing at all.
And the second effect is the satisfaction gap. So even if you do manage to choose, you're less happy with the result.
Right, because of the high volume of missed opportunities.
Yeah.
You spend the whole time wondering if option 7 or 14 or 23 was actually better. This is why browsing a streaming service for an hour and then choosing a mediocre movie is often less satisfying than just flipping on a classic cable channel where the choice was made for you.
It's choice overload. In a world of 30,000 grocery items and 2 million Amazon books, it's a chronic source of anxiety.
It really is.
Okay, finally in this segment, let's get into a crucial distinction for finance and decision theory. Risk versus uncertainty and our bias toward ambiguity aversion.
This is absolutely fundamental. We have to internalize this difference. Risk means the probabilities are known. They're quantifiable. You can calculate them.
Like a roulette wheel.
Exactly. Betting on a roulette wheel where you know the odds is a risk calculation. Uncertainty or ambiguity means the probabilities are unknown or unknowable, or you just can't quantify them using statistics. Investing in a brand new, complex technology company is pure uncertainty.
And the Ellsberg paradox shows that we just hate the unknown.
We despise it. People will always favor known probabilities over unknown ones, even if the expected payout is identical or worse. We have this profound aversion to ambiguity.
And this has big consequences in business.
Huge. In the business world, managers often make disastrous choices because they try to force truly ambiguous, uncertain situations, like entering a novel market into familiar risk categories. They use tools and statistical models that simply don't fit, just to reduce the feeling of ambiguity. Clarity requires acknowledging when you're dealing with genuine uncertainty and then adapting your decision framework accordingly.
All right, now we shift inward. We're looking at how we assess our own skills and how our behavior changes within a group setting. And we're starting with the massive gap between capability and perception, the overconfidence effect.
This is maybe the most universally pervasive bias of them all. People systematically, and I mean systematically, overestimate their knowledge, their abilities, and the accuracy of their predictions.
And the sources stress this isn't just a motivational tool.
No, it's raw and it's innate. It is not counterbalanced by underconfidence. Even self-professed pessimists tend to overrate themselves, just less dramatically than optimists do.
Why is that so critical? I mean, if everyone is overconfident, doesn't it just balance out?
No, because it leads to excessive risk-taking, disastrous planning, and poor negotiation tactics. When 90% of drivers believe they are above average,
Which is statistically impossible.
impossible, or 95% of entrepreneurs believe their startup will succeed, you have systemic risk just built into the economy.
And overconfidence often shows up as chauffeur knowledge. We pretend to be the driver when we're really just reading the roadmap.
Chauffeur knowledge is the appearance of expertise without the substance. The sources brilliantly delineate the difference here. The true expert, the driver, knows the limits of their knowledge. They are unapologetic about saying, I don't know, when asked a question outside their circle of competence.
And the chauffeur.
The chauffeur is the polished ringmaster, the newscaster, or the consultant who speaks eloquently but lacks that primary, hard-won experience.
So we should always be asking, are they truly the principal investigator, or are they just reciting a script that someone else prepared?
Precisely. And this is so vital because we often confuse eloquence, charisma, and presentation style with genuine, deep understanding.
Next, let's talk about the ego defense mechanism known as self-serving bias. We're the heroes when things go right and the victims when things go wrong.
The self-serving bias dictates that we attribute our successes to ourselves, our intelligence, our diligence, our hard work, and we attribute our failures to external, uncontrollable factors.
Bad luck, unfair rules.
Malicious external forces. It's a profound protector of our self-esteem.
The sources gave two brilliant examples.
Yeah.
The CEO claiming credit for record profits, but blaming currency fluctuations for the downturn,
Oh, I see.
and the dynamic in married couples.
The marital studies are just hilarious and so revealing. When you survey them, both partners in a relationship systematically overestimate their contribution to the health, happiness, and function of the marriage.
So when you add them up,
When you sum up their perceived contributions, the total often exceeds 100%. We genuinely believe we are doing more than our fair share.
and what's the remedy for this?
The source suggests something brutal but effective. Seek out friends who are honest enough to tell you the truth. Or if you need truly honest feedback on your strengths and weaknesses, ask an enemy.
Wow. Okay, so when we turn that attribution outward and start assessing other people, we run into the fundamental attribution error.
The FAE is our default setting. We tend to vastly overestimate individuals' influence and underestimate complex, external, situational factors when we're judging other people's behavior.
So if a CEO fails,
We blame their character, their intelligence, or their hubris. We ignore the messy market dynamics, the regulatory changes, the unforeseen competitors.
the media fuels this too. They're always looking for a single, easy narrative, a hero or a villain.
Exactly. They'd rather do that than embrace systemic complexity. When someone cuts you off in traffic, your immediate reaction is, what a selfish jerk.
Right, attribution to character.
You don't immediately think, I wonder if they just received a terrible emergency call or are late for a critical appointment. That's attribution to situational factors. The FAE just makes the world simpler by reducing complex outcomes to easily identifiable individual causes.
Now, let's talk about a feeling we all desperately cling to, the illusion of control.
This is the tendency to believe we can influence something over which we have absolutely no objective sway. It just gives us psychological comfort in the face of randomness.
The silly examples are the best.
They are. Throwing dice harder for a high number, wearing your lucky socks to watch a football game on TV.
The man waving a red hat to keep the giraffes away.
That's the one.
But the psychological effect of perceived control is real, even if the control itself isn't.
That's the key finding of the sound booth experiment. Researchers subjected participants to escalating noise. One group had a big red panic button. It was completely non-functional.
And what happened?
The subjects with the fake button, the illusion of control, were able to tolerate significantly more noise than the control group without the button. The mere presence of a non-functional mechanism provided tangible psychological relief and resilience.
That relief is powerful, but it doesn't change the statistical outcome, which brings us to regression to the mean. We are constantly forgetting that extreme performance is inherently unstable.
We ignore the fact that extreme highs or extreme lows in any measurement, sports performance, pain levels, employee performance, will tend to naturally move back toward the average over time. It's a statistical inevitability, but we mistakenly assign a causal reason to the change.
And the most destructive consequence of this is often seen in management or education.
Oh, absolutely. When a poor-performing employee gets castigated, the stick, and then improves the following month, the manager falsely concludes that the reproach caused the improvement.
And the opposite for praise.
Conversely, when a high-performing employee is praised, the carrot, and then regresses slightly back toward their average, the manager concludes that praise actually hinders performance. In both cases, the shift was likely just statistical noise correction, regression to the mean, but the manager walks away with this dangerous, false lesson that the stick works.
And speaking of confusing luck with skill, the outcome bias makes us judge a decision based solely on its outcome, ignoring the quality of the process that led to it.
This is a terrible metric for learning anything. If you take a massive risk that had a 95% chance of failure, but it happens to pay off, you're celebrated as a genius.
And if you make a perfectly rational, well-calculated decision that had a 95% chance of success, but it falls into that 5% failure category,
You're condemned as incompetent. The outcome bias forces us to retrospectively believe the bad outcome was somehow inevitable all along.
the sources use that thought experiment of the monkeys trading stocks.
Right. If you take 1 million monkeys trading randomly on the stock market, after 20 weeks, you will statistically find one success monkey who, purely by coincidence, always chose the right stocks.
And the media will descend.
The media will descend upon this monkey, analyzing its methods, its diet, its demeanor, confusing pure luck with foresight and skill. This is exactly how we treat successful investors who simply got lucky in volatile markets. We looked for a story of genius when the process was completely random.
Okay, let's pivot now to social dynamics. Our brain is hardwired to follow the crowd, which leads to social proof, or the herd instinct.
Following others was, historically, a very high-utility survival strategy. If everyone else in your group is doing something, it must be safe or correct.
And this mechanism is so deeply rooted that we apply it today even when it's objectively ridiculous.
Like the use of canned laughter on TV shows. It's designed to signal to us that we should be amused. Or, less trivially, choosing the crowded restaurant in a foreign city because the locals suggest it's good. That's social proof in action.
But the danger of group pressure can escalate dramatically, warping common sense in really high-stakes environments.
The troubling example from the sources is Joseph Goebbels' 1943 speech. When he demanded to know if the assembled audience desired total war, they roared their support.
But would they have done that individually?
The source argues that if those same people had been asked individually and anonymously, they likely would have never consented to such a terrifying proposal. The group dynamic created this emotional, high-pressure environment that just stifled all dissent.
And that herd mentality, it fuels groupthink, which often leads intelligent teams to make catastrophic, unanimous decisions.
Groupthink is conformity in a group leading to an unquestioned consensus. The Bay of Pigs invasion is the quintessential example.
Right.
Kennedy and his advisors, a collection of some of the smartest people in the world, unanimously approved a deeply flawed plan. The desire for harmony, for cohesion, for avoiding friction, it meant that dissenting views were suppressed. And that led to a major disaster, precisely because the group failed to engage in critical dissent.
Finally, we have to confront the emotional trap that keeps us tethered to bad decisions. The sunk cost fallacy.
The sunk cost fallacy is the ultimate emotional irrationality. It's justifying continued investment in something, be it a bad project, a failing relationship, a stock that keeps dropping, due to the non-recoverable costs you've already incurred.
You hear the phrases all the time.
I've spent so much money on this already, or I put so much time into this, I can't quit now. Those are the hallmarks of the fallacy.
And rational decision-making requires us to just forget the past.
Precisely. Rationality demands that you forget the costs to date. They are sunk, they are non-recoverable, and you only assess the future costs versus the future benefits. Continuing that financially ruinous supersonic Concorde project long after it was clear it would never be profitable is the classic illustration. We're driven not by future utility, but by the emotional fear of admitting that the initial investment was a mistake.
So we've established that our brains are systematic error machines. Okay, what is the path forward? Rolf Dobelli, whose work anchors so much of this material, suggests a core philosophy focused on via negativa.
The subtractive path.
Yes.
And this is maybe the most profound realization of this entire body of work. Thinking more clearly, achieving greater success, finding more happiness. It's achieved not by trying to acquire new, complex, positive knowledge.
Is that subject to all the other biases?
Right, chauffeur knowledge, confirmation bias. Instead, it's achieved by systematically eliminating errors and vices.
Michelangelo analogy.
Exactly. When he was asked how he created the statue of David, he replied, "I removed everything that is not David." We have to adopt that method. The realization is that negative knowledge, what not to do, is far more potent and robust than positive knowledge, what to do.
We know what destroys success.
We know with statistical certainty what destroys success, these systematic errors. We don't know the guaranteed path to success. The goal is simply less irrationality, which produces a massive leap in prosperity.
So we can't completely rid ourselves of biases, but we can manage the biggest offenders. And since individual willpower is notoriously weak because thinking is just tiring, we need to institutionalize rationality.
Absolutely. We need to outsource our cognition. We have to transform abstract awareness into concrete, formalized procedures that serve as a proxy for a well-rested system, too.
So for any high-stakes decision, a large investment, a career change,
a major negotiation, you have to use a detailed checklist, just like an airline pilot before takeoff.
what's on that checklist?
It forces you to check your decision against the greatest hits of bias. Are we ignoring a sunk cost here? Are we suffering from overconfidence in our timeline? Are we relying too heavily on a vivid story rather than the base rate? This mandatory pause forces the rational check that our fast brain would otherwise just skip.
And speaking of timelines, the checklist is vital for mitigating the planning fallacy.
The planning fallacy is just ubiquitous. We systematically underestimate the time and resources a task will take. The Sydney Opera House example is staggering. It was projected to cost $7 million.
And it actually costs.
$102 million.
Wow.
This happens because of wishful thinking. We focus only on the successful path forward, ignoring all the potential points of friction, external delays, and unforeseen complications.
So what's the most effective proactive mechanism the sources recommend for combating that wishful thinking?
It's called the pre-mortem. And you should do this shortly before a major decision is finalized. You gather the team, and instead of asking what could go wrong, which invites defensive answers, you deliver a short speech.
What's the speech?
It is 1 year from today. The plan was followed perfectly, and the result is a complete, unmitigated disaster. Write down for the next 10 minutes every single reason why this disaster happened.
That's fascinating. Why is that specific framing so effective?
because it shifts the perspective from prediction to retrospective analysis. It is so much easier to describe why a failure did happen than to predict why one will happen. It forces the team to suspend their wishful thinking, overcome their confirmation bias, and uncover potential flaws like supply chain risks or internal disagreements that were previously overlooked by all that collective optimism.
That detailed, slow thinking is essential for consequential decisions. But what about the small daily choices? Do we need to apply a checklist to choosing dinner?
No, that would lead to overthinking, or what's called the centipede's dilemma.
Right. The centipede is asked which leg moves first, and it gets paralyzed.
Exactly. Excessive contemplation of small, low-stakes choices, like whether to order sparkling water or still water. It just drains the limited cognitive energy you need for the big decisions. For the small stuff, trust your intuition. Let System 1 run the show. System 2 must be reserved exclusively for high-stakes decisions where its effort is actually justified.
And this wisdom requires knowing your limits, which brings us to deformation professionnel.
This is the danger of applying your specialized expertise where it just doesn't belong. Mark Twain's observation is perfect. If your only tool is a hammer, all your problems will be nails.
So engineers see everything as a structural problem.
Psychologists see everything as a relational problem. Economists see everything as an incentive problem. We force unfamiliar concepts into the familiar mental models of our training.
So how do we escape the tyranny of the hammer?
By acquiring multiple mental models from multiple disciplines. The sources suggest committing to internalize the core, most important ideas of a new field like evolutionary biology or chemistry or psychology every single year. This lets you view a problem from 5 different angles, broadening your repertoire beyond your core specialty.
And we have to clearly delineate our circle of competence.
Absolutely. And your circle is probably smaller than you think it is. Warren Buffett, for instance, can intuitively read a balance sheet and quickly dismiss or accept a potential investment. That's within his circle.
But if you asked him about something else,
If he were asked to assess the strategic market for a new social media platform way outside his circle, he would immediately apply hard, slow, System 2 rational thinking. He'd ask every conceivable question and seek external experts. We have to emulate that model. Trust intuition inside the circle and demand structured rationality outside of it.
let's close with some practical takeaways for daily life, starting with the irrational pursuit of trying to avoid a feeling.
That's the fear of regret. And it's an incredibly powerful psychological lever. It often drives us into irrational behaviors, particularly when it's coupled with urgency.
Like last chance offers.
Exactly. Buy this scarce piece of land now, or you'll regret missing out. If you never cared about that specific thing before, the fear of regret is being artificially manufactured to make you act.
Right.
If you never cared about seeing a rhino, the threat of them becoming extinct should not suddenly compel you to spend an exorbitant amount of money on a trip, purely to avoid the feeling of wishing you had acted differently later.
And finally, what can the science tell us about happiness and defeating the hedonic treadmill?
The hedonic treadmill is the scientific observation that the happiness effect of material things, the new car, the fancy villa, the expensive gadget, it just evaporates within a few months.
So we're forced to seek the next acquisition.
Constantly. We adapt to material luxury almost instantly. The banking executive who bought his dream villa was objectively unhappier 6 months later.
Why?
Because he couldn't adapt to the negative factor in his life, which was a 2-hour daily commute. The positive impact of the new villa faded, but the soul-crushing chronic stress of that commute remained impactful every single day.
So what does the science suggest we should invest in instead of material things?
The scientifically rubber-stamped pointers for long-lasting happiness are very clear. First, avoid negative things you cannot grow accustomed to, like commuting or chronic stress. Second, expect only short-term happiness from material things. And third, aim for maximum free time and autonomy, following your passions and investing heavily in friendships and experiences.
So long-term happiness comes from what you do, not what you possess.
Actively do, yes.
And one final practical tool for the pervasive problem of procrastination.
Procrastination is deeply irrational, but universally human, partly because self-control is a finite resource that just depletes over the day.
So what works?
The most effective tricks are externalization. Set firm, external deadlines stipulated by an authority figure, or transform your self-imposed deadlines into public commitments by telling everyone who will listen. The social pressure of accountability forces System 2 action.
So, the ultimate synthesis of this deep dive is recognizing the conflict between our two systems of thinking and the need to actively deploy structure when it matters most.
Absolutely. Awareness is merely the starting point. The real leap comes from acknowledging that while our brains are efficient, they are fundamentally flawed, and building those institutionalized checks is the necessary next step toward a truly rational and successful life.
We've explored the foundations of behavioral economics, the influencing power of nudge theory, core heuristics like mental accounting, errors rooted in perception like confirmation bias, and the clustering illusion.
We looked at how context warps valuation through anchoring and loss aversion.
And our internal flaws like overconfidence and the sunk cost fallacy. And we highlighted that critical need for via negativa eliminating bad thinking.
And we know for certain what destroys success or happiness, relying blindly on intuition and being susceptible to these systematic errors.
So we'll leave you with the final thought that builds on that Michelangelo method, the path of via negativa. Since not all cognitive errors are toxic, and some are even necessary for daily efficiency, the question for you is this. If you were to apply that subtractive path to your own life, what single predictable error would you dedicate yourself to eliminating first? And what concrete checklist or external protocol would you create to ensure its permanent removal?
That difference between just knowing about biases and actively building a defense is where true clarity begins.